All right, guys. Ryan D is ZZP here today.
And I'm Al.
Today, we're actually going to talk about the LSJ. Alright guys, so today is going to be more of an informational video about the various Ecotec engines. So I figured we start off with one of the more popular ones today, and that's going to be the LSJ. That is the 2.0 liter found in the 04 through 07 Saturn Ion Redline and the 05 to 07 Cobalt SS Supercharged. The LSJ is a very stout, very tried and true engine that we have worked with over the years. Al's Honey Badger has it in there. It's making a ton of power. It's a staple engine and one of the best Ecotec engines you can possibly get. Some of the few things we're going to go over, a good way to identify them. Number one, the LSJ has two unique parts that are kind of LSJ only. Number one is the fuel rail. Number two is the valve cover. The valve cover on the LSJ is smooth, unlike any of the other valve cover on pretty much any other Ecotec. So at a glance, you can probably know it. And the LSJ valve cover kind of only fits on the LSJ head, so you kind of know what you're getting on. On top of that, a stock one is also really identified by its big M62 supercharger that's sitting on top, right in front of it. You'll always know LSJ if it has one of those along with the valve cover and stuff. Yes, there's obviously 2.2 and 2.4 is a swap of one there, but again, the LSJ is very, very noticeable from another one, even at a quick glance. The stock, they're rated at 205 horsepower, 200 foot-pounds of torque. Whether that was under or overrated, some people in the dyno will tell you different, but it was always a very stout competitor. Again, the LSJ was kind of born from GM's business dealings with Eaton. They had a contract with Eaton to put a blower on any of their boosted cars. And so that's how the LSJ came with a supercharger instead of a turbo like the B207. So that's one easy way to identify it. Al, you want to give us some more technical details on the LSJ?
Yeah, so to kind of expand on where Ryan was just at, when GM was working on what ended up becoming the LSJ, their intention was actually working on the LNF. But things were so far behind schedule that's kind of where the supercharged LSJ came into play, and then it included the updates that they had at that point that they were going to then later put in the LNF. The Ecotec race program really got started before the LSJ even existed, and GM took a bunch of L61s, gave them to a team that had a lot of trophy truck experience in the Vortec world, and told them to break it and make it stronger. So they, without getting too detailed, they pretty much just started spraying it till the first thing broke, and then they eventually went to a turbo. And just kept breaking parts and making them stronger until they finally got to what was ran in the GM Pro front-wheel drive cars and the Phase 5 stock chassis cars. When they went to put the blower system on the LSJ, they did outsource some of that to Lotus, and actually a friend of a few of us here was able to get his hands on some of the original prototype parts from that development process, which aren't anything useful, but they're really cool to see the stages of how they developed the intake manifold, which, as we all know, is a gigantic compromise that ends up hurting you when you try to make big power. As Ryan mentioned earlier, the Saab B207R is very, very similar to the LSJ, to the point that the full long block can almost be directly interchanged. If you're going to be doing a supercharged build with it, I highly recommend swapping the LSJ cams over into the head. There's a nub on the side of the head from the casting that has to be ground down for the belt tensioner clear, and the intake manifold bolt holes are M6 on the Saab B207, whereas on the LSJ they're M8. So you'd have to either find shoulder bolts or drill and tap those up the next size. Beyond that, and especially the short block itself, it's a very viable low-cost replacement if you can still find one that's in good shape and has lower miles.
Now, what about the stock block capabilities of the LSJ? We've seen various numbers through them. The LSJ stock bottom end being a port injected car. That's another thing, guys. It's port injected, not direct injected like the LNF. So what are some things you can say about the stock block itself, the Gen 1?
So the Gen 1 block is not the greatest thing on earth, but I would give it the second best rating in terms of in stock form, behind what we refer to as the Gen 3 or the LDK LHU, which is a semi-closed deck with the cast-in liners. The Gen 1 block was incredibly strong. On my personal car, I made over 600 on an open deck Gen 1 block using forged rods and pistons. But that also had a very laggy turbo that didn't have a gigantic torque spike. So I was able to kind of manage the power and only really make that extra cylinder pressure where I needed to. That's not something that I recommend someone does. I'm just stating I did it and it survived.
So guys, and that's something I do want to kind of point on too. When you hear these things, oh, stock bottom end record, stock this, stock that, usually those are kind of on borrowed time, usually, and probably not something that anyone that's going to run for a long period of time. Al himself has made the power on it, but as you see, he does not suggest doing it.
No,
so,
I mean, I knew the risk that I was taking and I accepted that, and I happened to come out the other side without any catastrophic failures. But definitely would not recommend that someone else try to recreate that. I was just kind of screwing around with what I had available. That was one area where the LNF was kind of a downgrade of sorts. With the Gen 2 block, GM changed some of the cooling passages in an attempt to help the block cool better. But what they ended up doing was making the block weaker. This is a separate issue from the porosity problems, which were just purely random. The 08s, 09s, and I believe a very, very few early 10s.
Beginning of 10s, without getting too much to the LNF stuff.
And it's not all of them had it. It's just that's the year range where you could have had a porous block issue. And in that situation, you'll start getting your coolant and oil mixed together for no explainable reason. As far as the internals of the LSJ go, I have personally seen 567 wheel horse out of one. That particular engine was then turned down and raced for over a season, and when it was finally torn down, all 4 rods were bent. None of them broke, but they were all bent.
They're on their way to breaking.
Knowing how far the engine was turned down, they definitely were bent on that glory run, and it just happened to survive until the oil pump scattered. I have heard of people making north of 580, and Justin Reed's Goblin with Taylor Lear taking care of that car. Again, you're talking about scenarios where the potential catastrophic disaster is fully understood by the owner and the tuner, and you're just taking that risk to see what you can do.
You're rolling the dice.
I'm not in any way saying that everyone with an LSJ needs to run their stock block to 550.
Please don't do that.
Because most of the time, it is not going to work out well or work out in your favor.
And guys, please do remember, so unfortunately, as the LSJ did stop in 07, there are a finite number of actual LSJ things. So if enough heads get damaged, that means there's no more LSJ heads out there. So keep that in mind when you're trying to push your car to its, max potential and what could possibly happen to, cater that over to your next build or repairing it too.
Yeah, like even having access to engines and whatnot being here, I still keep a really close eye on my car to try to catch any potential issues before they put a hole in the block. Because I would much rather have to pause racing and rebuild or fix something than to have to buy an entire new engine for it. That's getting harder to find because I shot a rod out the front of the car. Another
thing about it, again, like I said, was the blower. The blower makes a real cool noise. You put an intake on it, you hear the whine of it and everything. However, people do not realize, or maybe they have by now, how good that the LSJ is with a turbo. A blower takes power to make power. So you kind of have a hard cylinder there versus the entry-level kit that actually out here helped to push forward. You make a lot more power just taking it off. Now you want to go into that?
Yeah, I mean, I've made it no secret that I'm not a fan of the TVS blower. My personal opinion on it is just that it's not a cost-effective mod. I have really good friends out there like Jason Whittleson that enjoys pushing the TVS and seeing what he can do with it both on the dyno and on the track. That's awesome. I love supporting Jason in that and seeing him take that path and experiment with it. It's just when it comes down to what I'm going to guide customers towards, if they're trying to make power and not waste money doing it, I'm going to push them towards a turbo setup. That was one of the main reasons I developed the entry-level kit, was to show people that you can have something that makes as much or more power than a TVS at a much lower cost in the end.
And again, guys, turbos are, we've talked about it many times, many videos, turbos are efficient. And the LSJ just shows how efficient it is.
And that's not to insinuate that turbo power is absolutely free. It just comes at a much, much lower penalty when you're regaining some of the energy from the exhaust gas to drive a properly sized turbo setup. The overall impact on how much power it costs versus how much power it adds drops way down. To give you kind of a relatable example of that, most LSJ people are pretty familiar with what 80-pound injectors on E85 are going to support. Even with the upgraded fuel pump and a boost reference, you're gonna, like a very, very well optimized M62 setup will max out the 80-pound injectors. Now I'm saying LS4, long tube, cams, ported head,
Throwing everything you can at it.
Everything you can, E85, it's gonna max that fuel system out and it's gonna make somewhere in the low 300s. You take that exact same fuel system, exact same pump, return style, 80-pound injectors, and put it on a properly sized turbo setup.
Like our entry-level kit.
Say with the entry-level kit or the 257, well, the 257 kit specifically, you'll make around 500 horse on that exact same fuel system. Now, the point of giving you that example is because your AFR in both of those setups is going to be a similar target. So if you're providing the same amount of fuel mass and your air-fuel ratio is the same, that also means the amount of air going through the engine is the same. So we have one car that is using a set amount of air and producing 500 horse to the tires, and then you go to the M62 car, it's using that same amount of air and it's only getting 3 1/4 down to the tires. So that is a real world example that a lot of you are gonna, it's like a light bulb's gonna go off in your head now that you've heard this, because we've all known this, but no one ever stops to think, holy cow, I never realized how much this microscopic pulley M62 was sucking out of the crank.
It is very noticeable because essentially you're removing the parasitic loss of the blower when you're putting a turbo on.
You're moving the unnecessary parasitic loss.
So it's just, it really shows you guys like how much, that stuff can take to, again, how much power it takes to really turn these blowers and get them moving pretty good. The LSJ is an engine that makes power from flow and a good efficient turbo setup. You make a lot of power on an S257, or you can make a lot of power on even a Z57 or a Z54. They are very, very capable engines of that. Every engine has its downfalls, of course, but the LSJ, for being more conventional than a direct injection setup, it is a very, very stout engine. Now, something you can, a possible negative about it too, depending on what kind of power band you want, the LSJ can have times, depending on how big it can be, a little peaky, a little bit. Like, so, you'll get a dyno sheet that looks like this, and then, versus kind of like a smooth transition up, which, can lead to either some tire roasting or dyno queen stuff, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, the blowers are known for having a flatter torque curve than what most of the turbo setups do, and that in itself, since horsepower is just calculated from torque and RPM, is why you'll get kind of a peakier graph, because the flatter your torque is, the more of a slant you're going to have on the horsepower line on the graph.
Exactly. So again, besides that though, they're cost effective, they're easy to swap into stuff, easy to run standalones with, they're easy to make power with. Granted, like kind of Al said, you can do a 400 horsepower supercharger build. It requires a higher compression, pistons in it, rods, built bottom end, and a TVS from E85, and pretty much everything you can throw at it to make around 400. But if you want to make 450, 500, we have a LSJ complete turbo swap kit that's going to do that. Our entry-level kit can make 400 on the Z57. It's a very, very capable engine to make power with. But even in kind of talking on the blower too, if you are okay with mid to upper 200s, that's very doable on the M62. Doing cams, valve springs, ported head, long tube header or mid-length header combo, all your cooling mods like your option B, your dual pass, your heat exchanger, doing all that with appropriate pulley size and not the smallest possible pulley you can do, will actually make good power, and it's a very fun car to drive around.
Yeah, I have said many, many, many times that if I had a second LSJ as a daily driver, it would be on an M62.
Yeah.
Probably with nitrous on top of it, because that's just how I am.
Jesus, Al.
But the point still stands, no, I'm not a fan of the blowers if you're trying to make big power. That doesn't mean that I think they're useless. They have a very, very, they're very, very useful when you want that off-throttle response, bombing around town, just something that's fun to drive without getting you in trouble too much.
Yep, and we have a shop LSJ that we affectionately call the taco car. It's yellow. It's a yellow LSJ 05. We've all driven it.
Nacho cheese yellow.
Nacho cheese yellow, exactly. We all enjoy driving it. Like every now and then I'll just get in like, oh, I gotta go around town. I just want to bomb around. And it's kind of cool hearing the blower noises all the time. You know, it's like, it reminds me. Is it crazy fast? No. But it's fun to drive. Tyler's blue LSJ, you know, Tyler's going through 2 of them, and he's rebuilding the current one, and he is enjoying and having the time of his life. So, and something that we've all realized, it's not always about how much power you can make. Sometimes, you know, it's about what you want to do with the car, and that's where the LSJ is very versatile. You know, you can do pretty much anything you want to do with it, depending on what you like: road coursing, autocrossing, big power, you know, highway racing. You know, big power drag stuff. Like it's a very versatile engine that's very stout too, depending on its range. Like a 450 horsepower LSJ in daily and kind of any setup.
It's a handful.
It's a handful, and it's a lot, and it's really fun, and it makes cool noises. So why not? And you put a big honking cam in that thing, oh, they elope real good. So because, as we said earlier, the LSJ is a non-VVT setup. And actually, I believe, Al, it's the only Ecotec that's non-VVT that has equal length cams, right?
Correct.
So that's, you know, just a little tidbit about the LSJ to give you guys more information about it. The LSJ stock comes with 33/34 pound injectors.
It comes stock with too small of injectors.
That is true. So another thing too about that, there are also GM supported so much that there were stage kits for the LSJ. You have the GM Stage 1, which was 42 pound injectors with a PCM flash. GM Stage 2, which was all the things in the Stage 1 kit. So your injectors, your PCM tuning, and a drop to pulley, along with a specific hub for the GM Stage 2. And then you have a smaller belt for more tension, so it doesn't slip. And then you have the illustrious GM Stage 3. That included all the same stuff as the Stage 1 and Stage 2, but you had a slightly smaller pulley. I think it's a 299 or...
Those were very, very rare.
Yes, super rare. And it set your car up for nitrous. But
yep, you could run a 50 horse dry shot. There was a dedicated pin on the ECU that you would run the trigger wire to. It would supply the extra fuel through the injectors. It's the Stage 3, like I have a Stage 3 PCM up on my shelf because it's just a cool, like artifact to have. They're completely useless and irrelevant in today's world. They're actually not supported by HP tuners anymore. And even when they were supported by HP tuners, you didn't have access to those extra features. Yeah, and I was like too, then it got rid of your AC, even though the car's still a street car. And it was very strange. It was just cool they offered it, you know, that GM has support for it. At least they tried to, but I feel like I wish they would have gone in a different direction with better cooling mods. Or didn't it come with cooling mods too, the Stage 3? At some point, the dual pass came in.
Yeah, so it's one of those things I wish they would have done something a little bit different, but the Stage 3 as a standalone thing, not cool, but cool if you find it and you just want to have it. You're like an LSJ collector like Tyler.
Kind of funny though how the Stage 3 GM kit is like exactly what I would do for a daily.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, weird.
The horsepower that came with, injectors, exhaust is too small from the factory. GM actually had an extrude home stock manifold option for the LSJ too. One of the biggest downfalls, in my opinion, I'm sure Al can go about what he thinks are the laminate overcores, the intake manifold and laminate overcores. Laminate overcores are these cylinders that are in the intake manifold. There's an end plate on them, and they basically help to cool the charge of air going through it. So basically, coolant flows through it, air goes through the laminate overcores, cools the charge of air going in there. However, if those laminate overcores get damaged or broken or anything like that, kind of good luck finding them. Yeah, they're really, really hard to find. Not my favorite air to water kind of system with it. No, I mean, it's not terrible, but it's not great.
The laminate cores were an alternative method of designing a heat exchanger. They kind of went through, I guess you'd call it a phase of popularity back when this engine was being developed. They work very well for a stock engine setup. I mean, they're more than capable of supporting that amount of airflow and pulling out the amount of heat that the stock and the stage kit systems would provide. But when we start modding them beyond that, it doesn't take very long before you overrun the capabilities of a cooling system. Yeah, that's probably the biggest Achilles heel when it comes to pushing the blower cars hard, is trying to keep the intake temps down. Yeah. And that's the largest factor of why I push towards the turbo setups, because they are so much more efficient.
Yep. That's one thing, unfortunately it's a drawback of them, but once you do turbo swap, most of that is already really gone.
Well, last but absolutely in no way the least for me, if you guys haven't heard of Nicholas and Carl Brunette and the Naperville Dragway team, they have been running a GMR-based Ecotec setup in their Pro Mod for many years. And they were the first 4-cylinder to ever run in the 5s. They were the fastest 4-cylinder in the low 6s for quite a long time. There was a little bit of back and forth there for a while. They blasted into the 5s a few years ago at this point, and it wasn't until this most recent World Cup Finals where a K-Series finally chipped the record. I assume Carl and Nick will be back to take that deeper very soon. We'll just have to see how that pays out. But I wanted to bring that up and throw it into this video because people act like the Ecotec is not good enough or doesn't have the potential. And it just seems like such a silly statement to make when, for a period of time, the fastest 4-cylinder in the entire world was a Gen 1 cast block, cast head. Now, it was fully gone through and had everything done it needed to handle that power, but it started its life pretty much as what we would know as the LSJ.
Yep, it's very true. So guys, I mean, the LSJ has tons of potential. It's a great engine. It can be found again in the cars that we name it off in. It's something that do not sleep on them. So, and they're cheaper now than the LNF, so that's kind of one of their main points. Granted, the rest of the cars may be, kind of torn up and everything like that, but the engine itself, it's a solid choice. Whether, me and Al give each other crap about everything like that, but I had LSJ. It's always been a great engine. It's something that, you should not sleep on. It can make good power, make comparable power to other vehicles, Like if you're trying to make 800 on stock block, yeah, probably not. But any realistic kind of thing you're trying to shoot for, the LSJ can get you there at a good, with a good price, fairly cheap and fairly reliably, as long as you know what to take care of.
Yeah, I would go so far as to give it the most versatile award out of the Ecotec family.
I can't super deny that. So this time. So guys, that's kind of really our lowdown dirty about the LSJ. If you have any questions, feel free to hit us up at customer service at ZZPerformance.com. Once again, Ryan D is ZZP.
And I'm Al.
He's always Al. See you next time.
Bye.